Hello, everyone. I'm excited to introduce you today to Margot from Cookie Yoga, a kids yoga teacher here on the East Coast of the United States and author of an adorable book called Cookie Doga. I love it. So thanks for being here, Margot. Today, our topic specifically, I was looking at your website and I'm really interested in us diving deeper in anxiety in particular. Something that I myself have, my daughter has, something we're seeing so much in especially after the pandemic and in our kids yoga classes. So I wanted to speak to you further about this. So to get started, let's talk about your background.
Yeah.
I want to learn about you as well as share you with our community. So tell us kind of how your journey into becoming a kids yoga teacher now.
Thank you so much for having me, Giselle. I feel like my journey is so similar to so many folks that I've spoken to over the course of the last 10 years at least, but probably even farther back than that. My brain will not let me go back that far.
Yeah.
But I I had a lot of anxiety as a child,
Mm.
but I didn't know that I had anxiety until I had a first full-blown panic attack at the age of 18. And so
Mm.
this moment was pivotal because I was in the middle of a final exam, my first year of college, and I suddenly couldn't breathe. I had
Mm.
horrible physical symptoms. I was gripping the desk and almost snapped my pencil. And I
Mm.
had no idea what I was experiencing.
Mm.
And I was lucky enough that the gentleman next to me, who I had never met, we were in a huge like lecture hall just taking this big final. Several classes came together for this final. And so I didn't know this person sitting next to me, and he just could sense that something was wrong, right? Something's wrong with
Mm.
this person to my right. And started, whispering to me, "Hey, are you okay? Are you okay?" And I couldn't even respond to him. I was completely incapacitated and also embarrassed. Like, but when
Mm.
you're in the middle of a panic attack, you really can't think about embarrassment or anything else. And I'm sure
Yeah.
anyone watching, listening, reading about this would agree if they had experienced it themselves. And so I just kind of looked at him, and he could tell he's like, okay, he's like, I think you're just having a panic attack. Again, words I had never heard before. Uh, and so he started to talk me through some stuff to do to help myself reorient to this physical space that I was in. Okay, do you
Wow.
think you can drop your pencil? I didn't respond. Just actively, something outer body, right? It was just okay. I
Yeah.
dropped the pencil. Okay, do you think you can, focus your eyes at one point on your desk? Okay. And so he just started leading me through mindful exercises. Once again,
Mm.
I felt like I was at the mercy of whatever. I'm like, I either freak out and die in this moment. I felt like I was dying.
Mm.
I know that sounds
Yeah.
dramatic, but that is how
Yeah.
it felt. Or I listen to this kind stranger who sees me, sees my struggle, and is doing anything he can in the middle of his final, by the way, to
Mm.
help me get through it. Now, the whole thing said and done was maybe about 2 minutes.
Mhm.
Um, between, maybe start to finish from when he started talking to me. And it felt like a lifetime though. It felt exhausting. But I was able to just like quickly say thank you, finish my final. And then afterwards I approached him and I said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm mortified. I don't know what to say. Thank you so much for seeing me, for helping me." And I was a very introverted person. Like, so the fact that I even had the guts to walk up to him afterwards and like talk to him was big for me. But I knew I couldn't let this person, this angel of a man, walk out of the door and me never
Yeah.
see him again and thank him for that. And so he's like, "Oh, no problem. I used to get panic attacks all the time." I was like, "Okay, I'm just learning about this now. Tell me, so I started
Right.
picking his brain, and he was really, really kind with his time. We only spoke for a couple of minutes, but he was like, "Oh, I learned some of that stuff at yoga here. You can take it here at college." And I was like, "Okay." And so I signed up for yoga for the next
Yeah.
semester, which I was a liberal arts major. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do when I was 18, like many 18-year-olds. I thought I knew I wanted to work with children, which here we are so many years later working with children and have been this whole time. But it was just it was just incredible. So that was my introduction to yoga. And once I started practicing, I was like, okay, I went through, finished my schooling. I became a teacher. I was an early childhood educator for many, many years before becoming a yoga and mindfulness teacher. And so I'm like, okay, I need to bring these practices to my 4-year-olds, right? I was teaching preschool. And so I started, bringing the practice to them, my adult practice, but using my knowledge and my education and my experience with children to sort of figure out the best way to bring them the practice. But
Yeah.
I had never been certified myself. And so after teaching for many years, And I got to the point where I was just wanting to do yoga with them all day,
Yeah.
and people were like, "Hey, you seem to love this so much and you're so good at it." And I was, it was a whole big thing in my classroom, and I was bringing other kids' classrooms into the class, and it was so one day it just hit me. I'm like, "I need to move on this. I need to elevate this for myself. If I'm showing up to work and all I want to do is talk to kids about their emotions and get them, moving their body and teach them about breathing and connecting to themselves and each other in more productive ways, then, maybe I'm done with teaching letters and numbers and all the rest of that stuff.
Yeah,
and
right.
and so, I got certified and kept getting different certifications and decided I'm leaving the classroom and I want to do this full time. And so I've been doing that for the last 8 years. And my children's book that you showed was a product of just having no work to do during the pandemic. And I
Oh,
always wanted to
wonderful.
be an author. And so I wrote
Yeah.
about the three things I know the most about. My life has been shaped in so many important ways by these three things. Cookies are obviously a silly one, but it has been a lifelong nickname of mine. It is my favorite dessert. And so, I yeah, that's sort of the long-winded version of my journey. And as far as my own relationship to anxiety, finding the yoga and mindfulness just changed my relationship to it. And that's when I
Mm,
looked back in the rear view and said, this is what I've been dealing with my entire life and just didn't have the knowledge, the awareness, the language for.
right.
And so also during the pandemic, one of my dear friends, and she was one of my mentors in kids yoga, um, and I decided we talk about anxiety so much, let's make this passion project. And so we decided to start podcasting about our individual experiences with anxiety, and it's called the Anxiety Warriors Podcast. And we also talk to guests, fellow anxiety warriors that come on to share their experience with it as well and talk to us and our listeners about the things that support them. And we also talk to folks about a range of issues too, that things that we know nothing about, things like eating disorders or depression or
Yeah.
suicidal ideation. So many incredibly important topics that aren't necessarily having light shown on them as often as they should be.
Yeah.
So
Excellent.
that's a bit, just a bit about
Yeah, I
me.
just I just want to highlight a few things there. I mean,
Yeah.
what a gift this chap was next to you. Like of all people, I mean, I'm sure you have that moment of when you retell that story, you think, how was I sitting next to him?
Yeah.
As
Oh,
you say, an angel of a
so true.
man. So I love how he had experiences himself and he was able to pass that on, which is
Yeah.
what you're now doing with others.
Yeah.
And he had the language for it. So I'm thinking about when we were growing up, we just really didn't have language for these feelings that we had. We didn't have an understanding of sort of this its spectrum. And I
Mhm.
think that's one of the things I look back on. I had an amazing childhood. I was very fortunate. Lived
Same.
in Canada. My parents were British, but we didn't really experience the spectrum of emotions. And I think that was the hardest thing when I had a child that has extreme emotions.
Yeah.
And so that would be the only thing I look back on. She's been my guide, my teacher on how
Mm.
to experience that. And I think the fact that what you're talking about, you're normalizing these big emotions. And for children now, like you said, you're working with 4-year-olds as an early childhood teacher, right? 4-year-olds
Yeah.
as young as that can learn at a deeper
100%.
level of what these feelings are. So they then, if they had a panic attack when they're 18, they've then got the language and awareness of what's happening in their bodies, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. So I love that combination you're bringing to your practice, your own experiences with yoga and mindfulness, and how yoga affected your experience of anxiety, your early childhood background, and then now as a kids yoga teacher. That's such
Mhm.
a beautiful combination to bring to your practices with children now. I love that. So,
Yeah.
how are you seeing, in your kids yoga classes now? How are you seeing anxiety present itself? Because a lot of kids yoga teachers in our audience and even teachers who are teaching it in their classrooms,
Yeah.
right? How is it looking like for you? How do you know that a
Yeah.
child has anxiety?
Yeah, so I'm so glad that you said the word spectrum, because anxiety is such an umbrella experience, and there are so many emotions and physical and emotional manifestations that experiencing anxiety can show up as, can look like. And So I want to tread carefully, right? When I look at my students and I say, I'm assuming that they might be experiencing something that's under that umbrella of anxiety, which is just sometimes, and I like to describe my own anxiety experience. And I've spoken to a lot of other kids yoga teachers and a lot of older students, that are practiced with me or with other teachers or adults in their lives, with noticing their anxiety and when it starts to tick up, or paying attention to those triggers or things that many of us are, over the course of even a few years, start to understand, okay, these types of environments trigger me, these types of noises, energies. Um, and so I just want to be clear, for anyone listening, that I am never trying to diagnose or let's go with judge, for lack of a better word, the
Mm,
experience of a child, just in the same way that I'm not trying to diagnose or judge the experience of anyone that's in my space or in my presence. Because truly, I'm not a doctor, right? So I don't really know necessarily that that
mm,
child is experiencing anxiety. And so I want to just say that off the top. However, right, we know that from many years of teaching experience, from being from leading groups of children of all ages, that there are certain signs and symptoms that show up, that once we can further explore that together, and often with parents or caregivers in the conversation, um, that we're able to say, okay, I feel like what I'm seeing is
mm,
X from you. And I know in the past, when you've done X, you've been feeling a little bit anxious inside. What do you
mm,
think? Right.
mhm,
And so there's lots of conversation being had with them, even really little. Right. And
mm,
even if all that's really doing necessarily is planting a seed, or getting them to pause for a second and just
mhm,
think about what I just said, even if it doesn't really change the behavior or what they're experiencing inside, just sort of using the language that Giselle, you had just said, and I had said in my story, that we didn't have when we were little kids, to say, as they grow and keep practicing, they're going to be able to become more seasoned at understanding those things about themselves, those physical
mm,
triggers, those and all of those other things. And so, you know, the biggest ones are just an overall sense of dysregulation, right? They come in, they're sort of, their energy's all over the place. Maybe they're, likely they maybe just come from school, or even if it's during the school day, because I know I teach in schools. And so if you get kids coming from one period or another, or maybe they're coming to me right after lunch or gym, right? And so
mm,
like their bodies and their minds are sort of in an all over the place, like untethered balloon kind of state.
yeah.
So that's the first one. And then there's the yin and yang of like hyperactivity, which I kind of just mentioned. And then there's the opposite, which is either
Mm,
over compliance or over tiredness, just like sheer exhaustion. And so what I mean by over compliance is just like, if I see a kiddo who seems very rigid in their body, who I feel, again, just observationally, that they are excuse me, trying to perform, right? Trying to behave in a certain way or speak a certain way. And that sort of diligence might feel really good to me as a teacher sometimes, right? It's like, oh, look at Susie over there. She's,
right.
got it together. She's focused. But a lot of times that some you can sort of look at it as the spectrum of, well, if Timmy over there is rolling around on his mat and yelling at his neighbor and throwing stuff, and then Susie over here is sitting like a statue and she's actively performing, these two things are, to me, in my experience and my observation of children, often leading to the same thing, which is they're anxious. They're anxious about feeling safe in this moment. They're not sure what their body needs, and they have no idea how to ask for help to figure out what their body needs.
Yeah.
And for someone who's maybe over compliant, it's just like, I maybe there's a little bit of a fear component too. Like, I better listen, otherwise maybe there's consequences. Maybe I'm going to get in trouble for, of some kind. And so um, those are some of the big ones that jump out to me
Yeah.
when I think about it. But it's such a deep and broad conversation that we could
Yeah.
have about noticing and observing what anxiety looks and sounds and feels like.
I think what you're speaking to there, Margot, is this idea we talk about, like the iceberg. Mona Delahook talks about on what's under the iceberg, right? And so what you're talking
Yeah.
about are the behaviors that you're seeing. So you're talking about the rigidness, or can't help but move their bodies, the wiggles. So it looks to us like they might have ADHD, or you're making some assumptions about
Right.
they can't focus, they can't pay attention. But
Right.
often it's because under the surface, there's so much anxious, nervous energy that
Yeah.
they just can't be in their own bodies. They kind of want to escape,
Yeah.
right? And so, what I'm hearing from you is that you spend the time with your students, you connect with them on a deeper level, and you're in tune with what's happening in your classes to try and like peel the onion, right, and understand your children at a deeper level. And I think that's the main thing. And whether we call it anxious, whether we call it other emotions, but
Right.
it's knowing that there's something else going on. There's a bigger story to what this child is experiencing.
Yeah.
And as you say, not judging, well behaved, not well behaved, right?
Right.
It's
Hmm.
about how is this person, this small human showing up in front of me, and
Yeah.
how can I service them, right?
Right. 100%. And it feels like such a heavy responsibility. And I just want to acknowledge
Mm,
that too for kids yoga teachers, for anyone that's in the lives of children. As an anxiety warrior myself, I feel that weight of that responsibility, right?
mm,
But then as long as you keep going back to, well, why am I here? And making those connections first, as you said, like the connection is how you're going to understand the child or the children in front of you. Without the connection first, they're not going to trust you. They're not going to see you as someone that
mm,
understands them, and that isn't just there to tell them what to do and what pose to get in, and that it's really more of an active connection that spawns all the practices that we hope that they're going to be able to take with them in their day-to-day lives and into their adult lives.
yeah. And coming back to that initial story, right? We don't even know the seed that we're planting as kids yoga teachers,
Yeah.
right? That you might have just a moment with a child
Hmm.
that completely changes the trajectory of their life, just like you had with the chap next to you
Exactly.
during test. So, it is a big responsibility. And just by showing up, by being there, by connecting with them, by holding space for
That's
them,
right.
that's
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 it.
yoga,
Mm.
right? And
I just got
that's
a full body chill. Yes.
right. Yeah.
Yes.
So let's think about what would you say are sort of your top tips, say, about how you're helping your students recognize their own anxiety and helping them move through their feelings, their big through feelings through yoga and mindfulness in particular.
Yeah. So the first one is just speaking my observations within moderation, right? Um, but as often as I can, I find that just stating something that I see or hear or experience is often like a pause button. It's just kind of like and as we were saying, it's maybe it leads into a deeper conversation depending on the age and the capabilities of a child. Maybe you just say the thing and then you move forward, right? And so stating my observations can be a really powerful pause, and usually more often than not it does lead to a conversation. And then that conversation, with hopefully eliciting some connection, we're able
Mm,
to unpeel the onion to dig a little bit deeper into what might be going on, and then dealing with what to do when these types of things come up. Um,
mhm,
and then practicing active curiosity is such a big one. So, right,
mhm,
we talk about mindfulness. Mindfulness is paying attention to our lives here and now with kindness and curiosity. That is the Amy Saltzman definition of mindfulness that I very much connect to. And so, active curiosity and self study, so self check ins, teaching children how to ask themselves questions, right? Actively showing them what asking themselves questions looks like. I often will talk about how I'm doing when I enter a room. Now, that doesn't mean I'm bringing my stress or my bad
mhm.
day necessarily
Right.
to the kids in front of me. They don't need that. And they don't deserve that, right? But I feel that it's actually pretty impactful if I can say, right, some observations that I have had of my own mind and body in the moment, right?
Yeah.
And so creating a space where active conversation and questioning of our thoughts, of our bodily sensations. And the more we do it, the better we become at practicing it and doing it when we're having a hard time.
Yeah.
Um, so just kind of talking frequently, right? Connection, having conversations with kids, even as young as 2 and 3. I've had pretty deep
Mm,
conversations with toddlers, and people are always shocked to hear how.
mm,
I mean, I often talk about toddlerhood as one of the last times of a child's life when they're completely free, right? Once they enter into traditional school or any kind of schooling, things become a little bit more like, okay, here are the rules. Here's what's going on. Here's get in line. And all the things sort of follow from there until 12th grade and then into adulthoods, right? Everyone is imposing who they are and their needs and wants on us all the time as we grow. And so I'm often so curious about the way toddlers respond to things because I really feel like we're all kids of all ages and adults are just like little toddlers inside, just desperate to
Right.
like do the thing and say the thing and be
Right.
themselves. But we've all
Right.
been conditioned and taught not to do that and be that and feel that. And so
Right.
just honoring the emotions that come up. So always validating for kids, whatever's
Mm.
coming up for you, it's okay. It's
Mm.
normal. There are millions of people that have had that same thought.
Right.
Isn't that so interesting that you've had that thought, right? And so just also making some like non-committal statements about whatever it is that they do share with you when you've been able to make that connection. Um, and so those are the big ones.
Yeah.
Practicing self-curiosity, um, offering them the language, right? Um, observing them and observing yourself in real time so they see, right, that active modeling of what does self check-in look like, what does asking myself about
Right.
how I'm feeling look like. um and yeah, I already forgot the last thing I said.
Yeah. 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 No,
But
that's great. That's so great because I love the fact that you're talking about you're starting from yourself. So you're
yeah,
modeling, you're using the language yourself, and then children can see we're just human, and it is completely normal to have big emotions,
right, that was it,
and I
thank you,
think yes,
validating.
validating where they're coming from. I love that, right?
Yeah.
And we can do that. We don't have to pretend as kid year teachers. We're not performers, right? You bring your
Yes.
unique voice, you bring your authenticity, you genuinely connect
Yep.
with your class. And look, some days are great and some days are not so great,
Yeah.
And I do that as a teacher. I'm a teacher sub and I go in and it's like that too. Some days are really hard and um and you could just have to read the room. I had one
Yeah.
student yesterday, a fourth grader, who you could tell he could not think about anything else but studying for this test. Like
Mm,
you could tell, right? And I
right.
could see my daughter's behaviors in him. And so I was able to kind of take him aside and just talk him through that. And so that
Yeah.
he was then able to learn because he just
Right.
couldn't think about anything else. And so I think that, and working with children, helping them through these obstacles and having someone see them and to co-regulate with them
Yes.
means so much, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear a
Great.
story. If you got a
Yeah.
story with about a child that you work with and you help them sort of identify these anxieties they are going through.
Yeah. So I want to say I teach kids of all ages, but I primarily I really love early childhood. That was where my education came from. I was a preschool teacher for over a decade. And so many of my classes every week are in early childhood centers, are, toddlers and babies and, up through like second and third grade. That's sort of like, so infants through third grade. So a lot of what I
Mm.
share is about that age group because that's the majority of the kids that I teach. Um, and so I had a 4-year-old student for the longest time, and it was a little boy, and he just had so much joy and life and
Mm.
energy. He was just the most delightful kid, in at least on the outside, right? He just presented as just everything's fine, everything's normal, I'm good, I'm happy. He would fall down and like to
Mm.
me, I'm like, oh my gosh, that sounded like it really hurt. And he was actively brushing it off. Like, oh no, 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 I'm fine. Right. And so those were some of my early triggers of like, okay, this child is very happy, happy go lucky,
Mm.
friendly, connected. But the overarching thing that I noticed was that they wanted to make everybody happy. Right.
Mm.
They were just like, no, 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 I'm good. Don't worry about me. Right. And so they, even at 4 years old, it was, what can I do for everyone besides myself? Um, and so with him in particular, I would talk a lot about like, a lot of the ways that we take care of our friends and our moms or whoever are the same ways that we can take care of ourselves. And that's so cool that we can love outwardly and we can love inside. We can love inwardly. And, again, at 4, he's just kind of like, yeah, cool, Miss Margot, whatever.
Yeah.
Um, but I would often talk to him about, placing a hand on his heart and sometimes on his heart and belly to just sort of be like an anchor spot for him.
Mm.
Right. And so when I would see him kind of hurrying around and trying to make sure everyone else is okay, I would say, hey, EJ, what do you think? Should we put hands on our hearts and breathe for a couple of seconds? And then he would just, oh, okay. Right. And it was just like this moment of self-care that I was hopefully offering him, right, as he moved throughout his day. And so he would stop and we would both put our hands on our hearts and we would take about 3 breaths typically. Sometimes it was just one, sometimes it was like 10, right? He was really into it. But it was sort of like a him and me kind of practice. Um, and then I start to worry, Margot, are you actually teaching him to do that when you're not around? And so that was a nice aha moment for me. And so then the conversation shifted to, you can do this anytime you feel like you're having a million other things to do. You can always pause and put your hand on your heart and take a few deep breaths. And so when the conversation shifted, it was sort of like a light bulb went off in his head. Oh, I can. And so I'll never forget it. I was all the way on the other side of the room and I finished up with a student and I looked over and I was just sort of surveying the room for a minute. I wasn't, I was trying to be present, just sort of like enjoying watching students be themselves and in community with each other. And I saw him stop when he was doing, take a few steps away from the group and put his hand on his heart. And I just was
Mm.
like, okay, he's doing it without
Oh
me.
my
The him and
gosh.
Margot practice is now just the him practice. And so
Yeah.
like I'm so grateful that I got to see it because a lot of times, as kids yoga teachers, we plant the seeds, you hope for the best. You don't always get to see what happens in 10, 15, 20 years. And so I always think about him. I haven't been connected with the family for so many years. I have no idea how he's doing, but I
Mhm.
always, for some reason, whenever anyone asks me to share a story about um, having success, right, in a
Yeah.
moment with a child, that story always springs to my mind first because
Yeah.
um, I also hope that for your kids yoga teachers that are maybe new to practicing and teaching and leading kids yoga that they know, and as you said before beautifully, Giselle, it's like we're human. It's okay that we don't
Mhm.
get it right every time. It's just we can't expect that of if we don't expect that of children, we can't expect that of ourselves. Got to show
Right.
up in this moment as best as we can. So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
And the simplicity, the cool thing about the story is the
yeah.
simplicity of a breath, right?
Hmm.
We're bringing so much knowledge and skills and props and plans, and we're bringing all the
Yeah,
things, right? We're
right.
lugging things around, whatever. But at the end of the day, what made the biggest difference is just hand on heart and a
Hmm.
deep breath that child can practice anywhere with
Yes.
anyone, anyhow. So I love that.
Yeah.
So just to end our chat today, so what advice do you have? You're talking about kids yoga teachers there. What do you say to kids yoga teachers who are feeling overwhelmed? Because the thing that we hear about in our community is, there's big emotions, there's big behavior, especially after school, for example.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on. What
Yeah.
advice do you have for those folks who are just so overwhelmed with all the big emotions that don't necessarily have an early childhood education background too,
Right, right.
right?
Yeah. God, so many things flood to my mind, but the biggest two I will say is make sure that you've practiced and have grounded and centered yourself before you step into a room where there's a bunch of kids. So the best thing I would say for you to do, and this is something that all of us who have been teaching, it doesn't matter how many years, it's taking the 2 to 5 minutes or however long you have to reset your own energy and emotions. Because as I said earlier in this chat, if you bring your own problems into the room, they're going to just feel that and take it on themselves energetically, emotionally, all the things. And look, when we mess up, there's always the opportunity for discussion and repair afterwards, right? And we can all be big proponents of that. But I think that the biggest advice is to make sure that you have a strong practice, even if it's not yoga and mindfulness. Maybe yoga and mindfulness doesn't feel good to ground and center yourself all the time, especially if you teach many classes a day or a week. So maybe your practice is, singing really loud in your car before you walk into the building, whatever it is, right? So ground and center yourself. That's number one. And number two is, oh gosh, I want to oscillate between a couple of different ones. I think it's just be prepared, but then prepare to let it all go. So like have your plans, as you just said, just have all the things that you would have in your lesson plan that you need. be over prepared if you feel like you need to, but then you have to prepare to let it all go and base whatever it is you're going to do with what's happening in the room in front of you, which what's with which Margot, slow down. Which is what's happening with the kids, right? If it's
Yeah.
after school, the kids are probably feeling a million things. So you have to just show up authentically. And the way that you can do that is just see the people in front of you as people and do your best to give them what they need. If you had a great grounding practice that was you thought was going to be awesome, but they're jumping,
Mm.
guess what? Time to do frog jumps instead. And then maybe afterwards you get 2 or 3 breaths in, and then that's a huge win.
Right.
Right. And
Awesome.
so, yeah, those are the big ones.
I'm always talking about these C's. So exactly what you're talking about there. You have to start with our own calm, right? We connect with our students on a deeper level. The third one is that we get curious about what's going on and what's
Yeah.
happening in the classroom that will make a difference. And then we get creative on how to serve them,
Love
right?
it.
And so I love what you're saying there.
I love
Awesome.
that. And I love alliteration. So you just made my heart. I'm like, oh, I got to write that down. That's good.
Yes. Love it. So where can we find you online and how can we
Yeah.
connect with you?
So I'm
And
on
what's
Instagram.
next?
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
I'm on Instagram at calmcookie_kids yoga, and my website is calmcookie.org. You can follow me over there, and that's how you can get to all of the other Instagram pages that I also help run or co-run. My anxiety podcast that I run with my friend Abigail is Anxiety Warriors Podcast, and so you can find us on Instagram at that name. And then actually, another friend in the kids yoga world, she's on the opposite end of the spectrum. She teaches tweens and teens. We actually just opened a kids yoga studio here on Long Island in New York.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
Back at the end of November, we opened, so just a few months in. And so we're hosting
Right.
classes and workshops for kids and their grown-ups to be able to learn these practices that changed our lives so much.
Oh,
And that's
yeah.
called Ground and Center. And so you can
Oh,
follow us there, Ground and Center LI, also on Instagram, and groundandcenter.org is the website. So I know that was a
beautiful.
lot of information. So
Yeah,
find me at
yeah,
calmcookie_kids yoga, and then you can find all the other things too.
yeah.
And as far as what's next, nothing's next. I'm focusing right now on having this kids yoga studio and seeing where that takes me, and my partner and I. And I do have a second book or two like floating around in my mind, but I don't want to um, attach too much energy to it just yet because I'm not ready to pull the trigger on really moving forward with it. But I am
Right.
starting to get the writing bug a little bit again and starting to just get the creative juices flowing, and it's been fun. It's like an outlet. So I'm not
Yes.
really focusing on it. It's just kind of like
Yes.
let's just have fun with that.
Yeah, I love it. Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time, Margot. I so
Thank
appreciate you.
you.
Thank you for sharing your wisdom, and I can't wait to share everything that you're up to with our community. Thanks,
Thank you so
Margot.
much, Giselle. Thank you.